What kind of person demands an elderly man vacate a park bench during a veteran's ceremony? Karen Miller, all 300 pounds of her, stormed through the crowd at Willow Park, her face a mask of entitlement, her voice slicing through the warm September air like a serrated blade. The annual Veterans Honor Day was in full swing, a small-town tradition where families gathered under sprawling oaks to pay tribute to local heroes. Children waved tiny American flags, their laughter mingling with the hum of a brass band tuning up on the modest stage. The scent of grilled hot dogs and fresh popcorn wafted through the air, and the community buzzed with quiet pride. But Karen, in her garish floral dress and oversized sunglasses, wasn't here to celebrate. She was here to claim what she believed was HOA's shaded bench where an elderly man sat quietly, his weathered hands folded over a cane adorned with military pins. Without a moment's hesitation, Karen planted herself in front of him, her shadow swallowing his slight frame. "This bench is reserved," she barked, her voice loud enough to turn heads. "I've been on my feet all morning, and I need to sit. Move." The old man, whose name was Samuel Grayson, looked up, his pale blue eyes steady but tired. His uniform, crisp despite its age, bore the weight of medals pinned to his chest, a bronze star, a purple heart, remnants of a life spent in service. He didn't respond immediately, just adjusted his cap, the words "Vietnam Veteran" embroidered in gold across the front. Karen's lips curled into a sneer. "I said move, old man. I don't care who you are. This is my spot." The crowd nearby began to murmur. A young woman, Emily Carter, who had been helping set up the event, froze mid-step, her tray of lemonade cups trembling in her hands. She knew Samuel. Everyone in town did. He was a fixture at these events, not just a veteran but the guest of honor this year, chosen to receive a community award for his decades of quiet service visiting schools to share stories, volunteering at the VA, and mentoring young soldiers. Emily's heart sank as she watched Karen loom over him, her voice growing louder, more venomous. "Do I need to call someone to get you out of here? I have rights, you know?" Samuel's silence only fueled Karen's rage. She stepped closer, her finger jabbing the air inches from his face. "You're ruining my day," she snapped. "This is a public park, and I'm a taxpayer. Get up." A man in his 30s, Tom Reynolds, who had been chatting with friends nearby, turned toward the commotion. His jaw tightened as he took in the scene, Karen's aggressive stance, Samuel's calm but weary expression. Tom had served 2 tours in Afghanistan and knew the look of a man who'd seen too much to be rattled by a bully. He started toward them, his boots crunching on the gravel path. But before he could intervene, something unexpected happened. A small boy, no older than 8, broke free from his mother's hand and ran up to Samuel. "Grandpa Sam!" he cried, throwing his arms around the old man's knees. The boy, Timmy, was Samuel's great-grandson, his face bright with admiration. He clutched a tiny flag, waving it proudly. "You're getting a prize today, right?" Samuel smiled softly, patting the boy's head. "That's right, Timmy," he said, his voice low but steady. Karen's face twisted, caught off guard by the child's arrival. For a moment, her bravado faltered, but she quickly doubled down. "I don't care about your family drama," she hissed. "This bench is mine, and I'm not moving until you do." The crowd's murmurs grew into a low rumble of disbelief. Emily set her tray down, her hands shaking not from fear but from anger. She stepped forward, her voice sharp but controlled. "Ma'am, that's Samuel Grayson. He's the guest of honor today. This bench was reserved for him." Karen whipped around, her sunglasses sliding down her nose as she glared at Emily. "Reserved? Where's the sign?" "I don't see a sign. I'm not breaking any rules." Emily's face flushed, but she held her ground. "It's common decency. He's a veteran. This event is for him." Karen laughed, a harsh, grating sound that silenced the nearby chatter. "Decency? I'm the one who's been standing in this heat for hours. I have health issues. You people don't get to tell me what to do." She crossed her arms, planting herself like a barricade. Samuel, still silent, adjusted his cane and looked out at the crowd, his expression unreadable. Timmy clung to his side, confused but protective, his small hand gripping Samuel's sleeve. Tom, now close enough to hear every word, clenched his fists. He wanted to step in, to tell Karen exactly what he thought of her, but he held back, sensing the moment wasn't right. Not yet. The tension hung heavy, the air thick with unspoken outrage. The band on the stage faltered, their notes trailing off as more eyes turned toward the confrontation. Karen, oblivious to the growing crowd, kept talking, her voice a relentless assault. I'm calling the city council on this. You can't just let people hog public property, she declared, pulling out her phone with a flourish. Emily's eyes widened. She knew Karen's type, someone who thrived on complaints, who weaponized bureaucracy to get her way. But what Karen didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have anticipated, was that this wasn't just about a bench. It was about a man whose life had been defined by sacrifice, and a community that wasn't about to let him be disrespected. As Karen dialed, her fingers stabbing at the screen, a new figure emerged from the crowd. It was Clara, the event organizer, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with a clipboard and a steely gaze. She'd been watching from the stage, alerted by the growing unrest. Clara didn't raise her voice, but when she spoke, the crowd parted. Mrs. Miller, she said, her tone icy but calm, you're disrupting a community event. I suggest you lower your voice and step away. Karen's head snapped up, her mouth opening to argue, but Clara wasn't finished. You're speaking to a man who saved lives in Vietnam. That bench is his because we asked him to sit there. If you have a problem, you can take it up with me. Karen's face reddened, her mouth working soundlessly for a moment. The crowd's attention was now fully on her, a sea of disapproving faces. She wasn't used to being challenged, not like this. But instead of backing down, she doubled down, her voice rising to a near shriek. This is discrimination. I'm being targeted because I'm standing up for myself. The accusation hung in the air, absurd but dangerous. Emily exchanged a glance with Tom, both of them realizing this was about to get worse before it got better. And it would. Because what Karen didn't know, what no one had told her yet, was that Samuel wasn't just a veteran. He was the man who, 50 years ago, had saved this very park from being bulldozed for a strip mall. A story buried in the town's archives but alive in the memories of those who'd been there. The revelation about Samuel's past hit like a quiet thunderclap, but it wasn't Clara who brought it to light. It was Tom, the young veteran, who finally stepped forward, his voice steady but laced with barely contained fury. You want to talk about rights? He said, his eyes locked on Karen. Let's talk about what this man did for this town. The crowd leaned in, the air crackling with anticipation. Tom pointed to the oak trees towering over the park, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. In 1975, developers wanted to tear this place down. Samuel Grayson chained himself to one of those trees for 3 days to stop them. No food, no water, just him and his conviction. This park exists because of him. Karen's phone slipped slightly in her hand, but she caught it, her face a mix of disbelief and defiance. That's got nothing to do with me needing to sit down, she snapped, but her voice wavered, the first crack in her armor. The crowd wasn't having it. Whispers turned to murmurs, then to open agreement with Tom. An older woman, her hair silver and pinned back, called out, "He's a hero, Karen. Show some respect." Others nodded, their faces hardening. Karen's eyes darted around, searching for an ally, but found none. Even Timmy, still clutching Samuel's sleeve, glared up at her with a child's unfiltered disdain. Then came the twist no one saw coming. A teenage girl, Mia, pushed through the crowd, her phone in hand, live-streaming the entire scene. Mia was known around town for her vlogs, usually lighthearted takes on local events, but today her face was grim. "This is Karen Miller," she said into her phone, her voice clear and deliberate. "Harassing a veteran at his own honor ceremony." The words hit like a grenade. Karen's head whipped toward Mia, her face paling. "You can't record me without my consent," she shrieked, lunging toward the girl. Mia stepped back, unfazed, still filming. It's a public event, lady. I can record whatever I want. The crowd erupted in cheers, a few clapping for Mia's quick thinking. Karen's outrage was now being broadcast to hundreds of local viewers, her every word preserved for posterity. Samuel, who had remained silent through the escalating chaos, finally spoke. His voice was soft but carried the weight of a lifetime. "Young lady," he said, looking directly at Karen, "I've faced worse than you in jungles half a world away. I'm not moving. Not because of this bench, but because I've earned the right to sit here." His words were simple, but they landed like a blow. The crowd fell silent, the weight of his dignity pressing against Karen's bluster. For the first time, she seemed to shrink, her shoulders hunching as the reality of her actions sank in. But she wasn't done. Not yet. Karen clutched her phone tighter, her voice rising again. "I'm calling the police. This is harassment," she declared, dialing with trembling fingers. Clara stepped closer, her clipboard now tucked under her arm. "Go ahead," she said coolly. "I'm sure Officer Daniels will be thrilled to hear how you're disrupting a veterans event." The mention of the local police officer, a veteran himself, made Karen hesitate. She knew Daniels, knew he wouldn't take kindly to her antics, but her pride wouldn't let her back down. She hit the call button, her voice shaking as she spoke to the dispatcher. "I'm being attacked at Willow Park. Send someone now." The crowd gasped, incredulous. Emily, unable to hold back any longer, stepped forward. "Attacked? You're the one yelling at an 80-year-old man." Her voice trembled with emotion, her hands clenched at her sides. Tom placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent gesture of support, but his eyes never left Karen. Mia, still live streaming, zoomed in on Karen's face, capturing every beat of sweat, every flicker of panic. The situation was spiraling, and Karen was at the center of a storm she'd created. Minutes later, a police cruiser rolled into the park, its lights flashing but sirens silent. Officer Daniels, a broad-shouldered man with a crew cut and a no-nonsense demeanor, stepped out. He scanned the scene, his eyes lingering on Samuel, then Karen. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Karen launched into a tirade, her words tumbling over each other as she painted herself as the victim. "They're ganging up on me. I just wanted to sit down, and this man refused to move, and now they're recording me." Daniels listened, his expression unreadable, then turned to Samuel. "Mr. Grayson," he said, his tone softening. "You all right?" Samuel nodded, his hands steady on his cane. "Just trying to enjoy the day, Mike," he said quietly. Daniel's gaze shifted back to Karen, his eyes narrowing. "Ma'am, this is a community event honoring veterans. Mr. Grayson is the guest of honor. You're causing a disturbance." Karen's mouth opened, then closed, her face flushing a deep red. She hadn't expected this. She'd assumed the police would take her side, that her complaints would hold weight. But Daniels wasn't finished. "I've seen the live stream," he said, nodding toward Mia, who was still filming. "And I've heard from witnesses. You're not the victim here." He paused, letting the words sink in. "You've got two choices. You can leave quietly, or I can escort you out for disturbing the peace." The crowd held its breath, waiting for Karen's response. Her eyes darted from Daniels to Samuel, then to the sea of faces watching her. For a moment it seemed she might argue, but the weight of the situation, her own words, her own actions, now broadcast for all to see, was too much. She muttered something incoherent, shoved her phone into her purse, and stormed off, her floral dress flapping as she pushed through the crowd. But the story didn't end there. As Karen disappeared down the path, the crowd's attention turned back to Samuel. Clara stepped onto the stage, her voice ringing out over the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's get back to why we're here to honor Samuel Grayson, a man who's given more to this community than most of us ever will." The crowd erupted in applause, Timmy waving his flag with renewed vigor. Samuel stood slowly, leaning on his cane, and made his way to the stage, his steps measured but proud. Emily wiped a tear from her eye, and Tom clapped louder than anyone, his respect for Samuel palpable. Karen's retreat didn't erase the sting of her actions, but it marked the beginning of her unraveling. The live stream, which Mia uploaded to her channel within the hour, spread like wildfire. By evening, it had thousands of views, shared across social media with captions like, "Karen versus Veteran. Who wins?" and "Entitlement meets honor." The comments were brutal, tearing into Karen's behavior with a mix of outrage and sarcasm. Local businesses, where Karen was a regular complainer, began to recognize her. The coffee shop she frequented posted a subtle jab on their social media. "Benches are for heroes, not complainers." The town's gossip mill churned, and Karen's name became synonymous with disgrace. She didn't take it quietly. The next morning, Karen marched into the town hall, demanding a meeting with the mayor. She claimed defamation, insisted the live stream was illegal, and threatened to sue everyone involved: Samuel, Mia, even Officer Daniels. The mayor, a patient man named Henry Brooks, listened to her rant for 10 minutes before cutting her off. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice firm, "you disrupted a public event honoring a veteran. The town supports Mr. Grayson, and we have no intention of pursuing your complaints." He handed her a copy of the town's code of conduct for public events, highlighting the section on disturbing the peace. "You're welcome to file a lawsuit," he added, "but I'd advise you to consider the consequences." Karen's bravado crumbled. She hadn't expected Thesa United Front, a community that refused to bend to her demands. She left the town hall in silence, her usual bluster replaced by a dawning realization. The live stream wasn't just a video, it was evidence. Her own words, her own actions were now a permanent record. The legal threat she'd wielded so confidently was toothless. Disturbing the peace was a misdemeanor, and the town had more than enough witnesses to back it up. Karen's name was mud, and she knew it. Meanwhile, Samuel's moment on the stage became the heart of the event. As Clara presented him with the Community Service Award, she shared stories of his past, not just his heroism in Vietnam, but his quiet acts of kindness over the years. He'd paid for school supplies for kids whose parents couldn't afford them, shoveled snow for elderly neighbors, and sat with dying veterans at the VA, holding their hands when no one else could. The crowd rose to their feet, their applause a thunderous wave of gratitude. Timmy stood beside his great-grandfather, beaming, his flag held high. Samuel, ever humble, spoke briefly. "I didn't do any of this for recognition," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I did it because it was right." Emily, watching from the crowd, felt a lump in her throat. She'd always admired Samuel, but seeing him stand up to Karen's bullying, seeing the town rally around him, filled her with a fierce pride. Tom, standing nearby, leaned over and whispered, "That's what courage looks like." Emily nodded, her eyes bright with tears. Mia, who had stopped filming to join the applause, felt a surge of purpose. Her live stream hadn't just exposed Karen. It had amplified Samuel's story, reminding the town of what truly mattered. Days later, the consequences for Karen became clearer. The local newspaper ran a story about the event, focusing not on her outburst but on Samuel's legacy. The article mentioned her only in passing, a footnote in a story of triumph. But that footnote was enough. Karen's social circle, already thin, shrank further. Invitations to book clubs and neighborhood barbecues dried up. Her complaints, once a source of power, now fell on deaf ears. The town had seen her for what she was: not a victim, but a bully who'd picked the wrong fight. For Samuel, life went on as it always had. He returned to his quiet routines, visiting schools and the VA, always with a kind word and a steady hand. But something had shifted. The town's respect for him, always present, had deepened. People stopped him on the street to shake his hand, to thank him not just for his service but for his dignity in the face of Karen's tirade. Timmy, too, carried a new pride, telling anyone who would listen about his grandpa Sam, the hero. The park itself seemed to hold the memory of that day. The bench, now unofficially known as Samuel's Bench, became a quiet symbol of resilience. Families took photos there, Veterans sat there to reflect, and kids like Timmy played nearby, their laughter a reminder of what the park stood for. Karen, meanwhile, faded into the background, her name a cautionary tale whispered at community gatherings. She demanded a bench, but what she'd lost was far greater: her reputation, her influence, and any shred of respect she might have claimed. The story of that day spread beyond the town, carried by Mia's livestream and the newspaper article. It became a small but powerful reminder of what happens when entitlement clashes with honor. It wasn't just about a bench or a veterans event. It was about a community choosing to stand for something bigger than one woman's demands. Samuel's quiet strength, the town's unity, and even Mia's quick thinking showed that courage and kindness could outshine even the loudest tantrum. And in the end, it was Samuel who sat on that bench, not because it was reserved, but because he'd earned it not just that day, but every day of his life.